think, let's see, I've got some pictures here of some C4 plants. So some of the better known ones are some of our grain crops. So for example, corn, sorghum, and sugarcane are all C4 plants. I think the picture on the bottom here, let me dim the lights down, which shows crabgrass. So crabgrass is kind of a common weed in people's yards. You've probably seen it in your yard. Is actually a C4 grass, whereas most of the sort of turf grass, like Kentucky bluegrass that we use in lawns and golf courses, that's actually C3. And so if you look at this picture, it's probably from the middle of the summer, and so we can see lots of brown, dead grass around it. So that's going to be your normal turf grass, which was losing too much water and therefore died from the drought. But our more water efficient C4 crabgrass was able to survive for longer. Yeah?
Does it usually compensate for the additional ATP since it's in such a hot environment? I mean, generally, so it doesn't really run into problems with ATP creation, or is it because they're always in hot environments because they have that extra H2O density, so they just get extra ATP from the sun?
Yeah, so there's, they can definitely produce enough ATP, so kind of the sort of race that you run into. Right. So in lower temperature environments that have more water in them, C3 plants are going to be able to grow faster, because they're going to be able to fix more carbon for every ATP they're using. But in hotter environments, the water advantages of the C4 plants will make them more competitive.
Right. Okay.
Hmm?
And this is spatial separation?
Yeah. So this is going to be to contrast it with the next one, which is CAM. So by spatial separation, I mean we are separating that rubisco enzyme from oxygen spatially. So we're fixing carbon in another cell, and then we're moving it over as an acid into that sort of special sealed cell where oxygen can't get at the rubisco. And that's going to be in contrast to our third mechanism, which is called CAM, which stands for crassulacean acid metabolism, which you don't need to remember. So kind of the cool thing about both C4 and CAM is that they have evolved many, many different times in plants. So I think C4, the mechanism, has evolved something like 40 times, which is pretty cool, and also shows how advantageous it is, especially in dry environments. So CAM is going to use what we call temporal separation to keep rubisco away from oxygen. So temporal, fancy word for talking about time. And so normally, with our C3 and C4 plants, all of these processes are going to be going on during the day, which makes sense, right? So you need sunlight to make your ATP and your NADPH. So let's do the Calvin cycle at the same time. But in CAM, we are going to do things a little bit differently. So in CAM, at nighttime, we will open up the stomata, and carbon dioxide will come in. And then it's going to be fixed in a pretty similar way to the C4 plants. So it's going to be attached to a 3-carbon sugar by the PEP enzyme to create a 4-carbon acid. And so then the plant will store that 4-carbon acid overnight in a special compartment called the vacuole. Has everyone got the night portion?
Is the vacuole the same thing that's used in the C4 process as the separate,
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in the C4 plants, it's actually 2 complete cells, whereas in this process, it's taking place in a single cell. So the vacuole is a compartment within a single cell. Hmm?
I'm not, it was just a spontaneous question. I was wondering, oh, in animal cells, do we have anything that does multiple cell stuff? Because we've only talked about within cell stuff, but that one might be off topic. So.
Short answer, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've got a bunch of carbon that's been stored as this acid. And so the difficulty with this is that the amount of carbon that you can store is limited by the amount of this acid that you can stash in your vacuole. So it can't just keep fixing the carbon indefinitely. All right, so now we've got a bunch of our 4 carbon acids stored up. The sun's going to come up. Now daytime. Now the stomata are going to close. And then we are going to remove the carbon dioxide from our 4 carbon sugar. And then we will do the Calvin cycle as usual. Yes?
Why haven't all plants ultimately evolved that way? Because to me, this seems like clearly the most efficient method to do that, because it saves the most energy, you're still absorbing all the stuff that you need, and you get to save all your stuff during water. It seems like that's very clearly the top of the evolutionary peak. Why would not all plants eventually have become cam plants?
Yeah, so that is a great question. Does anyone want to take a stab at that? So cam plants are super water use efficient. They've got this locked down. So why aren't all plants cam plants?
Not all plants need to be, because some of those plants grow well, especially rainforests in particular, in high water density environments. So if there's so much water, it would have no use for evolving to be a cam plant, thus allowing it to be possibly.
It would actually be maladaptive to keep that much water in it.
Yeah, and so these guys are going to be limited by the amount of carbon that they can store as that 4 carbon acid overnight. And so that means that if they were put into an environment with lots of water, temperatures not very high, they're going to grow much more slowly than a C4 plant, and especially a C3 plant that doesn't have that limitation. So here are some examples of cam plants. Some pretty cool ones. So pineapple is a cam plant. So that's from a kind of very hot tropical area, so that makes sense. Sort of the classic example of cam plants are cacti. So most cacti are cam plants, nearly all of them. And then orchids. So orchids are pretty cool. So not all orchids are cam plants, but the majority are. It's actually evolved separately a bunch of times within the orchid family. So this is vanilla planifolii, which is Mexican vanilla, and so that's where most of our vanilla flavoring comes from, natural vanilla. So orchids are what are called epiphytes, so that means that they actually grow on other plants. So normally orchids grow like on tree branches. So often it's in rainforests, and so you don't think of them as being water limited, but they don't have their roots down in the soil. They're just up on a tree branch, right? So they're only going to get whatever water directly falls onto that branch or kind of runs down the trunk. So they are actually quite water limited. So this process then is a competitive advantage for